Welcome to the SAGE presentations on the Homophile Movement, Part 4 of a 5-part series, presented by Shoulders to Stand On, a program of the Out Alliance. In this video, we will look at One Inc., Parting of the Ways, One Magazine, and a second Parting of the Ways. We begin in the year 1950. In November, when the first meeting of the Mattachine Society took place in Los Angeles under the name Society of Fools. In April 1951, they changed their name to the Mattachine Society and operated almost in total secrecy. And we looked at the derivation of that name in the previous presentation. In 1952, Dale Jennings, a member of the Mattachine Society, was arrested on charges of soliciting an officer to commit a homosexual act. In the trial, Jennings admitted he was a homosexual, but not guilty of the charges. The jury voted 11-1 for acquittal, on the basis that in those days, in 1950, police intimidation, harassment, and entrapment of homosexuals were common, and the jury felt this was what happened, and so the case was dismissed. The trial, however, resulted in bringing a lot of attention to the Mattachine Society and an increase in awareness of the gay rights movement. It also increased the organization's membership. There were differing views within the Mattachine Society on how best to fight for equal rights for homosexuals. Harry Hay, the primary founder of the society, believed gays were a unique, especially talented group who had been a primary part of tribal societies, and they needed to come together and reclaim those sacred traditional roles. Jennings, on the other hand, as well as others in the society, believed there was no difference between a gay man and a straight man. He adopted a more private role, believing homosexuals as a group had very little in common and wanted to fight for the right to be left alone. Hay and the rest of the Mattachine Society collectively wanted homosexuality to be more visible to the public and fought for greater homosexual awareness. In 1952, October, Jennings and a small group from the society met to discuss separating and forming a separate organization that would illustrate their own personal views more. In 1952, in November, One Inc.'s Los Angeles-based organization formed, and the Articles of Incorporation were signed by Antonio Reyes, Dale Jennings, and other founders of what would become One Inc. One Inc. is credited with being the first LGBT organization in the United States to have its own office. It acted as a prototype for LGBT community centers. It was the first nationally legally sanctioned organization dedicated to the promulgation of information on homosexuality. One Magazine was core to that mission, and One Inc. readily admitted women with their pseudonyms, for again, in that day and time, the closet was where many people lived, and for women, they many times used their first names, but changed their last names to maintain their anonymity. One Inc. became the dominant organization in Los Angeles, and with the financial assistance of Jennings' sister Elaine and her husband James Porter, its magazine, One, became for a period of time the voice of the gay and lesbian movement. One magazine released its first issue in January 1953. In 1954, the Mattachine Society was reorganized and incorporated in California, and the Mattachine Review debuted in 1954. Now, One Inc. was mailing out their magazine each month, and in October of 1954, the postmaster, Otto Olson, declared that that issue of One was obscene, lewd, lascivious, and filthy, and therefore unmailable under the Comstock laws, and refused to deliver it. One Inc., of course, sued in U.S. District Court and sought an injunction against the postmaster. In March of 1956, the U.S. District Judge Thurman Clark ruled for the defendant. In February of 1957, a three-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously upheld that decision. Then, in June of 1957, the attorney for One, Attorney Julba, filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court. On January 13, 1958, the U.S. Supreme Court both accepted the case and, without hearing oral argument, issued a terse per curiam decision reversing the Ninth Circuit decision. The Supreme Court cited its June 24, 1957 landmark decision in Roth versus the United States as the foundation for their decision in One's favor. This was the first U.S. Supreme Court ruling to deal with homosexuality to address free speech rights with respect to homosexuality. In the Roth versus United States landmark case, the constitutional test for determining what constitutes obscene material unprotected by the First Amendment was redefined. And by protecting One in One Inc. versus Olson, the Supreme Court facilitated the flourishing of a gay and lesbian culture and a sense of community. This was at the same time the federal government was purging homosexuals from its ranks. So in the February 1958 issue, immediately following the Supreme Court decision, One told its readers that for the first time in American publishing history, a decision binding on everyone affirms, in effect, that it is in no way proper to describe a love affair between two homosexuals as constituting obscenity. In 1956, One established the One Institute of Homophile Studies. Their work was to organize classes and hold annual conferences, and they published the One Institute Quarterly, a journal dedicated to the academic exploration of homosexuality. However, in 1965, One Inc. separated over irreconcilable differences between One's business manager, Dor Legg, and One magazine editor, Don Slater. So in 1965, in October, Slater changed the name of One to One, the Homosexual Viewpoint. And then the name was changed to Tangents later on. After a 2-year battle in court, Dor Legg's faction retained the name One Inc. Don Slater's faction retained corporate, library, and archives of One Inc. In 1968, Slater's group became the Homosexual Information Center, or HIC, a nonprofit corporation devoted to a continuing inquiry into the nature, circumstances, and social issues of homosexuality. The Tangent Group, registered DBA of the Homosexual Information Center. In December 1969, One magazine ceased to be published. In 1996, One Inc. merged with the Institute for the Study of Human Resources, a nonprofit organization created by transgender philanthropist Reed Erickson to allow One to accept charitable donations. The Institute was the surviving organization, and One the merging corporation. In 2005, the Institute donated historical materials, including most of One Inc.'s corporation records, to the Oviatt Library at California State University in Northbridge. In October 2010, One transferred its archives to the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives for preservation at the University of Southern California. One Inc. continues to exist to organize exhibits and gather new materials. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and we look forward to seeing many of you at the next presentation, The Homophile Movement, Part 5. Thank you.